When you're meeting someone for the first time, there are certain topics of conversation that seem to always come up, right? Besides the what's your name? Also, are you from here or where are you from? What are you doing here? What do you do for work? Maybe you get into married, kids. Maybe in your case, why are you learning Spanish or how are you learning Spanish? And I really like to ask these questions when I am meeting a new student as well, because I find that self-introduction so important. And I really do want to see how confident they are introducing themselves in Spanish. However, surprisingly, many students who are not beginners, who have spent quite a bit of time with self-study courses and sometimes even one-on-one classes and group classes, and certainly have been playing around with Duolingo for a while, aren't able to confidently respond to those questions. Why is this? Why is it that so many Spanish learners struggle to introduce themselves with confidence, even though when I ask them, what do you want to speak Spanish for? What kinds of things do you want to be able to say? That self-introduction is almost always top on the list. It's a very interesting phenomenon. So let's talk about that today, as well as what you can do about it if you find yourself in that same situation. Comencemos, amigos. Hola mis queridos líderes del lenguaje, bienvenidos a otro video. Yo me llamo Erika. Aquí les ayudamos a aprender a hablar español con confianza y crear una rutina de aprendizaje irresistible por medio de las historias y las conversaciones auténticas, y también unas cuantas excursiones aquí en México. Si eso les parece interesante, pues suscríbanse para no perderse nada. All right, guys, so traditionally when you are learning Spanish, you are going to be learning through contexts that are prepared for you. These are going to contain common words, common phrases. Then you're going to learn some useful grammar that's going to help you put that vocabulary together into sentences, which is really exciting when you get to put sentences together. Now, there is nothing wrong with this. In fact, especially if you're a complete beginner to the language, I would actually recommend that you start there. You recommend just getting some sort of introduction to the language, listening to the language a lot, things like that. However, there comes a point where you'll actually want to go to speak to people, right? To speak to humans in the real world. And when that happens, you may find that if you've exclusively been learning through material that is prepared for you, you may run into some challenges. The first problem is that you are unique. Where you've been, where you're from, your experiences are unique to you. And so of course you're not just going to find those things laid out for you in a textbook or in a prepared course. But a lot of learners will think, well, I'm just going to keep learning. I'm just going to keep, going through the motions with this book, with this course, with these classes that are based on this book. And eventually I'll have so much vocabulary and grammar structure that I'll be able to say whatever I want to say. And that is true. Eventually, if you're really consistent, you would be able to come around to those things that really, really make your personality come out in Spanish, those personal things that are unique to you. But how long do you want to wait to be able to do that? How long are you willing to wait to be able to jump in and practice your back and forth conversation? Because when you don't have the skills to jump in and practice your back and forth conversation, you'll find the overall process of learning Spanish is just a lot slower. The thing is, if you're not starting out with these personal contexts, it's going to be a little harder to even have this basic conversation. So these basic conversations that I'm trying to have with a new student, that have to do with their self-introduction, that you would think would kind of be the first thing that a person would learn, well, they're just not there yet, right? They just haven't learned those particular words yet. It's almost as if someone gave you two options, okay? Option number one, you can go build your house brick by brick, okay? Little by little. A really nice, a really pretty house, but it's going to take you 10 years to have that complete. And during those 10 years, here's the thing, you can't live anywhere else. You can't rent a house. You can't go stay with family or friends. There's no other options. You are going to be on the street. You're literally going to be a street person while your house is being built. But it's going to be really pretty at the end. Or you can go ahead and move into this house. It's not so pretty. Oh, the paint's coming off. Like it's really not aesthetically pleasing, but it's functional, okay? It has plumbing, it has electricity, it has water. You can live here, okay? And you can move in today. And over the next few years, you can beautify this house. You can remodel it however you would like. And in the meantime, you have a place to stay. So it's true that, a lot of people would not want to go live in an ugly house, but isn't it better than being on the street? In the same way, when you jump into your language learning with things that you need that are functional, with these conversations that you personally want to have, they really aren't going to be perfect at first, but you have something that you can use. When you focus your learning on things that you anticipate yourself using and that you know that you can go use pretty much right away, even though it's not perfect, it's like having that place to live immediately. And then as you improve, as you continue learning Spanish, as you continue to get the feedback that you need and all of the input that you need, the comprehensible input through reading and listening, and you can kind of start to self-correct as well, what you've been saying to what you're now reading or hearing, then you're going to have that time to beautify your language, okay? But if you forever take this very structured approach of I will follow what is here laid out for me and I will learn eventually, it's just going to be a slower process. And since it's taking you longer to get to the types of conversations that you personally want to have, that is not going to give you the confidence that you need to go ahead and start having conversations. And speaking Spanish is one of the best and fastest ways to actually improve. I chose the ugly house option, okay? I spent some time learning those basics of how to put a simple sentence together, but then, and we're talking not much longer, guys, not a year into my journey, much less, I started needing to dive into real conversations. And these conversations were not pretty, okay? I got hyper-focused on what I needed to speak about personally and what people tended to ask me all the time and preparing a response for that. And it was not perfect, but it gave me that opportunity to practice. I'm not finished. I will never be finished. I learn new Spanish all the time. It's one of the most fun parts of language learning, that you get a chance to learn continuously. But for a very long time, I've had this opportunity to remodel it over the years. It's looking pretty good now. And that process happened a lot sooner than that one brick at a time approach. And even if you did take that one brick at a time approach, I mean, think about it. If you were building a literal house, depending on where you live, you may have to get a permit that expires after a year. Okay, then you have to get that again. Some of the things that you're working with may need to be replaced just because it's taking a long time. And the same thing happens with language. If you are not actually using your Spanish, but you're just kind of learning through some structured material as it is, waiting for it to be perfect before you start to speak, there's always going to be something to replace or to do over before you reach that level of perfection, which doesn't even exist. A lot of that language is going to be lost. A lot is going to become rusty if you are not actually using it. So the best thing you can do is go in and speak with what you have. But of course, in order to develop the confidence to do that, you need to be learning some Spanish on the back end. But why not have your focus on the practical, personalized context that you actually need? When I started talking to humans, I noticed that there were things that tended to come up all the time. One was that topic that we mentioned at the beginning, that self-introduction. Hey, where are you from? Are you from here? Is Spanish your native language? Are you learning Spanish? Also, since I learned Spanish in the United States, but I had that opportunity to speak to native speakers that were in the United States, I was very curious to know, how long have you been here? What's life like here compared to where you're from? Why'd you come here? Tell me, right? That was very, very fascinating to me to understand. Knowing those basic things about a person is just the basis of forming any kind of relationship. I also was and am a volunteer in the Spanish-speaking community in the field of teaching. So obviously, I really, really needed to learn the Spanish that I needed to teach on the topics that I needed to teach about. The point is that I learned to converse about the things that I needed first, and then the vocabulary that I would learn from this one conversation and the sentence structure that I would learn about this one conversation would just carry over into the next and into the next until finally it just wasn't that hard to speak about almost anything. But that was accomplished one conversation at a time. So what are these advantages of learning through personalized context instead of only what you would find in a book or a generic course? relevance, and personal meaning, which leads to better memorization. Did you know that when you learn grammar through personal context, personal stories and situations, that grammar tends to stick a lot better because of the significance that it has in these sentences that are relevant to you? Let's say an example. Students often struggle with the difference between el pretérito indefinido, or what we tend to call in English the preterite past tense, and the pretérito imperfecto, which we tend to just call in English the imperfect past tense. There's a difference between the two in Spanish, and we don't have such a significant difference in English, and so students tend to struggle with that difference. So here we have a textbook definition, okay? So pretérito indefinido se utiliza para acciones pasadas y completas en un momento específico. So the preterite is used for past actions that are completed at a particular point in time. For example, comí pizza ayer. I ate pizza yesterday. It was this certain time. I ate it. It's done. There's nothing is continuing with that. It's already done. Okay, comí is in the preterite past tense. What about the imperfect past tense? Well, this is used to describe actions that were habitual, or when you're narrating a context, telling a story about how things were, how they used to be, expressing an action that perhaps was progressive in the past. That's the imperfect tense. So, an example, cuando era niño, jugaba fútbol todos los días. Okay? So these are things that you would habitually do as a little boy. So with that explanation and with those examples, you start to understand the difference, right? But what about if you create something based on your personal story? So here's a little paragraph of my life, okay? Soy Erika. Nací en Kentucky, en los Estados Unidos. Cuando era niña, no me interesaba aprender otro idioma, pero con el tiempo mi actitud cambió. Todas las semanas llevaba a cabo diversas actividades para la comunidad hispanohablante de Kentucky. Además, trabajé como intérprete médico durante 6 años. Posteriormente, me mudé a México con mi familia. When we take a look at this, we see some preterite past tense like nací, I was only born once. Mi actitud cambió. This was a moment in time when my attitude changed. Trabajé como intérprete durante 6 años. Here I'm talking about a specific period of time in which I worked as an interpreter, and it's appropriate to say trabajé in this case. And then me mudé. I moved to Mexico at a certain moment in time. We also have some imperfect past tenses in here. Cuando era niña, so when I was a child. Usually when we speak about things like our childhood, this kind of ongoing process, because we didn't become adults overnight, we tend to use the imperfect. So cuando era, no me interesaba aprender otro idioma. I wasn't interested in learning another language. It wasn't just a moment in time that I wasn't interested. It's just over the span of time, I just wasn't interested for a while. And then todas las semanas llevaba a cabo. So I would carry out. So this is something that I would habitually do. I used to do it. So we have this kind of mix of preterite and imperfect. Now, this is my little story. What about your story? What if you created something based on your story and then you had someone to help you through it, to help you understand the differences in these past tenses? And what if you practiced the story? Do you think that would help you get a grasp on these different types of verbs? And not only on the different types of verbs, but these specific verbs that you need to tell your story? I think it would help you a lot. The truth is that the rule teaches us the concept, and then standard examples increase our understanding of that concept and start to answer some of the questions that we may have. But personalized examples, like the ones that come from your own story, engrave the grammar into your memory, even if you never were to know the rule. And that makes it easier to repeat that same grammatical pattern and use it in future conversations. You won't even know where your knowledge came from. It'll just be natural. Another benefit of learning through personalized context is that you get to apply what you learned right away. That is so motivating to take what you just learned and then go be able to have a conversation about it, because it's something that is actually interesting to you and something that you would actually use. And then you have this opportunity for natural repetition. If these are conversations that you typically need to have, you get to practice them over and over again in natural context. Whereas if you're learning Spanish through a travel-based course, for example, and you're not even traveling, traveling, what you're going to be able to use immediately from that is going to be limited. So I hope you can see the benefits of learning through personalized context. I'm very passionate about this. If you'd like to learn more about this method, then I invite you to my free workshop, the Next 90 Days Spanish Workshop. You can go to ericaraylanguage.com/90 days or click the link below in the description box to register for the next showing of the workshop. In the workshop, you'll see how to take the theory of what I have explained today into action for yourself. I can't wait to see you there. Hasta pronto, amigos.